Now that's cute. You think you're in charge here? On a crowded Friday night, two black twin sisters, Danielle and Dominique Carter, were harassed, threatened, and arrested by power-tripping, drunk off-duty cops at a local bar. Mocked for their looks, treated as outsiders, and manhandled in front of silent onlookers, they were paraded as easy prey, women to humiliate, victims with no power to fight back. But the officers never realized who they were cuffing. Before this night, the Carter sisters had survived harder battles, honed by years as FBI agents. The cops thought they were breaking two women. In truth, they were igniting their own downfall. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The bar's usual Friday night chatter died down as Danielle Carter stared directly into Sergeant Rick Dalton's bloodshot eyes. The overhead lights caught the police badge still clipped to his belt, a stark reminder of the power he wielded even while off-duty and drunk. "I said back off," Danielle repeated, her voice steady and firm. She remained seated but straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. Rick's smirk widened as he leaned closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. "Or what, sweetheart? You gonna make me?" His massive frame towered over their table, casting a shadow across the sisters' faces. Officer Mark Stevens chuckled, a low, ugly sound. He positioned himself behind Dominique's chair, placing his meaty hands on the backrest. "We're just being friendly. Don't they teach manners where you girls come from?" Dominique's fingers tightened around her glass, but her face remained calm. She glanced at Luis behind the bar, who was wiping the same spot over and over. His jaw clenched as he watched the scene unfold. The youngest officer, Kyle Boyd, swayed slightly on his feet. "Check out those curves," he slurred, making an exaggerated hourglass gesture with his hands. "You two must be twins. Double the chocolate, am I right, Sarge?" Several patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A woman at the bar grabbed her purse and quietly slipped out the door. The music seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the heavy tension in the air. "Last warning," Danielle said, her dark eyes never leaving Rick's face. "Walk away while you still can." Rick grabbed an empty chair from a nearby table, dragging it across the floor with a screech that made everyone wince. He spun it around and straddled it backward, getting uncomfortably close to Danielle. "Now that's cute. You think you're in charge here?" He looked over his shoulder at his fellow officers. "Ladies seem to have forgotten whose town this is." Mark's hands slid from Dominique's chair to her shoulders. She went completely still, her expression hardening like stone. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, each word precise and measured. "Or what?" Mark squeezed her shoulders. "You gonna call the police?" All three officers burst out laughing at his joke. Luis appeared at their table, holding a tray of empty glasses as an excuse. "Gentlemen, maybe we should—" "Shut it, Luis," Rick snapped without looking at him. "Go back to washing dishes before I decide to check your papers again." Luis's face flushed, but he stood his ground. "Sergeant, I don't want any trouble in my bar." Kyle stumbled forward, bumping the table and sloshing the sisters' drinks. "Then tell these stuck-up by—" "Choose your next word very carefully," Dominique cut in, her voice like ice. "Oh, yeah?" Kyle leaned down, putting his face inches from hers. "Or what you gonna do about it, beautiful? Besides, looking like that in those shorts, you're basically asking for attention." Danielle's hand moved toward her purse, but Dominique caught her eye and gave a subtle shake of her head. This wasn't the time. Not yet. Rick noticed the exchange and grinned wider. "Got something in that purse you want to share with the class, princess?" "Just my lipstick," Danielle replied smoothly, "though I doubt it's your shade." Mark's grip tightened on Dominique's shoulders. "You know what your problem is? No respect for authority. But we can fix that, can't we, boys?" A young man at a corner table pulled out his phone, pointing it discreetly at the scene. Kyle noticed and started toward him, but Rick's sharp whistle stopped him. "Later," Rick said meaningfully. He turned back to Danielle, dropping all pretense of humor. Here's what's going to happen. You two are going to apologize for your attitude, buy us a round of drinks, and maybe, if you ask real nice, we'll forget about this little display of disrespect." Danielle took a slow sip of her drink, then set it down deliberately. "Here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to take your hands off my sister, step back from our table, and leave us alone. Because right now, you're making a very big mistake." "That sounded like a threat," Rick said, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Mark, Kyle, did you hear a threat?" "Sure did, Sarge," Kyle said eagerly. "Definitely threatening an officer," Mark agreed, his fingers digging into Dominique's shoulders. Rick's smirk turned predatory. "Now that's a serious offense. Might have to take you ladies downtown, teach you some manners." The sisters exchanged another look, a lifetime of silent communication passing between them in an instant. The tension in the bar had reached a breaking point, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. The three officers moved in closer, forming a tight circle around the sisters' table. Rick's eyes roamed over their bodies with undisguised hunger, lingering on their legs exposed by their shorts. "Would you look at that?" Rick drawled, nudging Kyle. "Twins really do share everything, even their taste in slutty outfits." Dominique's face remained neutral, but her jaw tightened. She'd dealt with men like this her entire career, first in community outreach and now at the Bureau. Their kind of power came from making others feel small. "Those hips, though," Kyle said, licking his lips. "Bet you girls can dance real good." He started swaying his own hips in a crude imitation. Mark chuckled, his breath hot on Danielle's neck. "What do you say, ladies? Give us a little show? Since you're dressed for it and all." The few remaining patrons studiously avoided looking their way. Luis had disappeared behind the bar, probably calling someone for help, but the sisters knew better than to expect backup in a town where these men ruled. "Back up," Danielle warned again, her voice carrying across the now silent bar. "You're drunk, and you're making fools of yourselves." Rick's face darkened. "Making fools of ourselves?" He gestured at their outfits. "You come in here, dressed like that, shaking what your mama gave you, and we're the fools?" "Our clothes aren't an invitation," Dominique said quietly, but with steel in her voice. "And your badge isn't a license to harass women." "Harass?" Rick's laugh was ugly. "Honey, if you didn't want attention..." He moved behind Dominique's chair with surprising speed for a drunk man. "You wouldn't dress like this." The sound of his hand connecting with Dominique's backside echoed through the bar like a gunshot. His laughter followed, loud and cruel, as Dominique shot up from her chair, her face flushed with fury and humiliation. "You son of a..." Danielle lunged forward, but Mark was ready. His bulk slammed her against the wall, knocking the wind from her lungs. He pressed his forearm across her collarbone, pinning her in place. "What's the matter?" Rick taunted, still standing too close to Dominique. "Can't take a compliment from an officer of the law?" He reached for Dominique again, but she knocked his hand away. "Touch me again," Dominique said, her voice trembling with rage, "and you'll pull back a stump." Kyle giggled, pulling his handcuffs from his belt with an exaggerated flourish. The metal clinked ominously in the tense silence. "Ooh, now that's definitely a threat against an officer." Around them, patrons stared into their drinks or at their phones, shoulders hunched. A middle-aged couple near the door gathered their things and hurried out. Nobody wanted to witness what was coming next. Nobody wanted to be the next target. "Someone's getting awful hostile," Mark said, increasing the pressure on Danielle's chest. "Maybe we should take this somewhere more private. Teach you ladies some respect." Danielle struggled against Mark's grip, her training screaming at her to fight back, to protect her sister. But she forced herself still, knowing that one wrong move now could spiral into disaster. Rick moved closer to Dominique, using his height to loom over her. His breath reeked of whiskey and spite as he growled, "Let me explain something real clear. This is my town." He jabbed a finger into her chest. "My streets. Another jab. My rules. Kyle jangled the handcuffs again, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. And rule number 1 is, you don't talk back to cops. Especially not when we're being so nice, Mark added, his free hand moving to stroke Danielle's hair. She jerked her head away, and his fingers tangled painfully in her curls. Rick circled Dominique like a shark, his eyes never leaving her body. See? We could have had a real good time. Could have shown you girls some real Southern hospitality. His hand shot out, grabbing Dominique's wrist when she tried to step away. But now you've gone and hurt our feelings. Luis appeared at the edge of the scene, his face pale but determined. Sergeant Dalton, please. They're customers. Did I stutter before, Luis? Rick's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. One more word from you, and ICE will be real interested in that back room of yours. Luis's mouth snapped shut, his hands balling into helpless fists at his sides. Smart man, Rick sneered. He turned back to Dominique, twisting her wrist until she gasped. Now, you're going to learn what happens when you disrespect officers in my town. Kyle stepped forward eagerly, handcuffs raised. Want me to do the honors, Sarge? Ladies first, Rick said, yanking Dominique closer. He leaned in until his lips nearly touched her ear. You don't talk back to cops in my town. Kyle moved behind Dominique with practiced efficiency, roughly yanking her arms back. The handcuffs snapped closed around her wrists, with a metallic click that seemed to echo through the silent bar. Her breath hitched as the cold steel bit into her skin, Kyle deliberately making them too tight. Not so high and mighty now, are you? Kyle sneered, shoving Dominique down. Her knees hit the sticky floor hard, making her wince. The sharp smell of spilled beer and decades of grime assaulted her nose. Mark had Danielle pinned face first against the wall, her cheek pressed against the rough wooden paneling. She could feel splinters catching at her skin as he twisted her arms behind her back. Rick hummed, circling them like a vulture. All that sass, all that thickness, means nothing when you're in cuffs. His eyes raked over their bodies again, lingering where their shorts had ridden up from the rough handling. Should have played nice when we gave you the chance. Dominique's shoulders burned from the awkward angle Kyle held her arms. She could feel every pair of eyes in the bar, either staring or deliberately looking away. The humiliation burned hotter than the physical pain, knowing these drunk bullies were putting on a show of power. Please, Luis's voice cracked as he stepped forward, hands raised. They haven't done anything wrong. Let me call them a cab. Rick whirled on him, closing the distance in 2 quick strides. He grabbed Luis by the collar, shoving him back against the bar. You say one more word, and I'll have this whole place shut down faster than you can say health code violation. His voice dropped lower, venomous. How many illegals you got working in that kitchen, Luis? How many fake papers? Luis's face went ashen. His hands trembled as he backed away, but Dominique caught the subtle movement as he slipped his phone deeper into his apron pocket. The red recording light blinked steadily. That's what I thought, Rick smirked, turning back to his prey. A woman at a nearby table raised her phone, trying to capture what was happening. Kyle spotted the movement and lunged forward, snatching the device from her hand. No cameras, he shouted, throwing the phone down. The screen shattered against the hardwood floor, pieces of glass and plastic skittering across the boards. The woman shrank back in her seat, eyes wide with fear. Mark laughed, using his free hand to pat Danielle down roughly. Gotta make sure they're not hiding anything dangerous. His fingers lingered too long at her hips, her waist, sliding up her sides. Could have weapons anywhere in these tight little outfits. Danielle jerked against his grip, earning herself a harder shove against the wall. Stay still, Mark growled in her ear, unless you want to add resisting arrest to the charges. Charges? Dominique demanded, still on her knees. What charges? We haven't done anything. Rick crouched in front of her, grabbing her chin. Disorderly conduct. Disturbing the peace. Threatening an officer. His thumb brushed across her lower lip. Maybe assault, depending on how cooperative you decide to be. Dominique yanked her face away from his touch, disgust evident in her expression. Kyle responded by pulling her arms higher behind her back, making her gasp. "Get them up," Rick ordered, standing. "Time for a ride downtown." Mark hauled Danielle away from the wall while Kyle roughly jerked Dominique to her feet. The sisters were pushed toward the door, stumbling in their captor's grip. The remaining patrons parted like water, creating a clear path to the exit. No one made eye contact. No one spoke up. The only sounds were the sisters' footsteps and the jingling of the officers' equipment belts. "Such a waste," Rick said, holding the door open. "Could have been a fun night for everyone." He reached out to touch Dominique's hair as she passed, but she jerked away despite Kyle's painful grip. The night air hit them like a slap, humid and heavy. The parking lot's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the scene, making everything feel surreal. A patrol car sat waiting, its presence suggesting this hadn't been as spontaneous as the officers pretended. Mark shoved Danielle harder than necessary, making her trip. She barely caught her balance, her shoulders straining against the cuffs. "Careful there, sweetheart," he mocked. "Wouldn't want to add falling down drunk to your charges." Through the bar's windows, faces watched, some worried, some curious, all helpless or unwilling to intervene. Luis stood in the doorway, his phone still recording from his apron pocket, his face a mask of carefully controlled rage and fear. As they were marched toward the waiting patrol car, Dominique felt the heat of humiliation burning through her entire body. Every step on the cracked asphalt was an insult. Every touch from Kyle's guiding hands a violation. Her FBI training screamed at her to fight back. But the tactical part of her mind knew now wasn't the time. Beside her, Danielle's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, fierce and full of promise through clenched teeth. They have no idea who they're messing with. As they reached the bar's entrance, Dominique felt the rough grip of the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Her shoulders ached from the unnatural position, but her mind raced with calculated precision. Years of FBI training had prepared her for moments like this, when everything seemed lost, but opportunity still lurked in the details. She twisted her hands behind her back, fingers straining against the metal restraints. Kyle's drunken focus was more on shoving her forward than watching her hands. With practiced flexibility, she managed to work 2 fingers into her back pocket, where her badge case sat heavy against her thigh. The leather case was slick with sweat, making it harder to grasp. Dominique bit her lip, concentrating through the pain as she worked the case, free millimeter by millimeter. Finally, she felt it slide free. With a subtle flick of her wrists, she let it drop. The badge case hit the wooden floor with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the tense silence. It landed face up, the golden shield catching the bar's dim light. The FBI seal was unmistakable. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," Dominique announced, her voice carrying across the now silent room. Despite the bruise blooming on her cheekbone where Kyle had grabbed her face earlier, her tone remained steady and authoritative. Her eyes swept the crowd, making sure every witness understood the gravity of what they were seeing. The patrons who had been averting their eyes now stared openly, phones discreetly emerging from pockets. The air in the bar seemed to thicken with tension as the implications sank in. Danielle stepped forward, shrugging off Mark's momentarily loosened grip. She stood tall despite her bound hands, chin raised in defiance. "You're assaulting federal agents," she added, her words sharp as ice picks in the silence. Her dark eyes locked onto Rick's face, watching the realization hit him. For a moment, Rick just stared at the badge on the floor, his alcohol-flushed face frozen in surprise. Then, like a switch being flipped, he burst into loud, forced laughter. The sound was ugly, more threatening than amused. "Well, ain't that cute?" He kicked the badge case, sending it skittering across the floor. "You think that fancy little card means anything here?" His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "This is my town. My rules." He nodded to Kyle, who immediately yanked the cuffs tighter on Dominique's wrists. The metal dug deeper into her skin, drawing a sharp intake of breath despite her efforts to stay stoic. Kyle's breath was hot against her neck as he leaned in close. Should have kept that pretty mouth shut. Around them, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. The sound of phones being unlocked and camera apps opening filled the tense silence. Rick's head snapped toward the noise, his face darkening. "Anyone takes a picture," he announced to the room. "They'll be joining these ladies downtown. Interference with police business is a serious offense." His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered weapon. Luis moved carefully behind the bar, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. He leaned close to a regular customer seated at the counter, his voice barely above a whisper, but urgent. "Remember what you saw tonight. Remember everything." The patron gave a subtle nod, eyes fixed on his drink. Mark grabbed Danielle's arm again, his fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to leave marks. "Let's go, FBI," he sneered, making the title sound like an insult. "You can file a complaint from your cell." The sisters were pushed forward again, through the door and into the humid night air. The parking lot's security lights cast harsh shadows across their faces as they were marched toward the waiting patrol car. The metallic smell of an approaching storm hung heavy in the air, matching the electricity of the moment. Rick walked behind them, his boots scraping against the asphalt. "You know what happens to cops who end up in jail?" he asked conversationally. "Same thing's gonna happen to you federal scums. Worse, probably." His voice dripped with cruel anticipation. Kyle shoved Dominique roughly into the back seat, not bothering to protect her head from the doorframe. She bit back a curse as pain shot through her temple. Danielle was pushed in after her, the sisters pressed together in the cramped space. The door slammed shut, with a final-sounding thunk. Through the window, they could see Luis standing in the bar doorway, his face a mask of controlled anger and helplessness. His phone was still recording in his apron pocket, capturing everything. Rick leaned into the driver's window, speaking to the officer behind the wheel. "Take the long way to the station," he ordered with a meaningful look. "Show our federal friends some local hospitality." The engine roared to life, and the car pulled away from the curb. Street lights swept across the interior in rhythmic patterns, illuminating the sisters' faces in brief flashes. The partition between the front and back seats couldn't fully muffle the officers' malicious laughter. As they turned onto the main road, Danielle leaned close to her sister, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "They just declared war," she whispered through clenched teeth, her words carrying all the promise of retribution to come. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the dingy hallway as Rick and Kyle shoved the sisters forward. Their footsteps echoed against the scuffed linoleum floor, punctuated by the jingling of handcuff chains. "Welcome to your new home," Rick sneered, his alcohol-soaked breath hot against Danielle's neck. He grabbed her arm harder, fingers digging into her skin as they approached the holding cells. The booking area was empty, except for a bored-looking desk sergeant who barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m., its second hand ticking away with maddening slowness. Kyle fumbled with the cell keys, his movements still unsteady from drinking. "Ladies first," he mocked, swinging open the door to the first holding cell. The metal hinges screamed in protest, the sound setting teeth on edge. Dominique stumbled as Rick pushed her roughly into the cell, her shoulder hitting the concrete wall. Without removing her handcuffs, he slammed the door shut. The lock clicked with a sound of finality. "I want my phone call," Dominique demanded, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "It's our right." Rick leaned against the bars, a cruel smile playing across his face. "Rights? You got no rights here. This ain't the FBI building with your fancy rules." He turned to Kyle. "Put the other one in cell 2. Keep 'em separated." Danielle resisted as Kyle grabbed her arm, planting her feet. "This is illegal detention. You're making it worse for yourselves." Her words earned her a hard shove, that sent her sprawling onto the floor of the second cell. "Shut your mouth," Kyle snapped, slamming her cell door, "before I give you something real to complain about." The sisters exchanged looks through the bars separating their cells. Dominique's face was set in a mask of controlled anger, while Danielle's eyes blazed with barely contained fury. They'd been through tough situations before, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Rick settled behind the booking desk, pulling out incident report forms with exaggerated ceremony. "Now, let's see. What should we charge you with?" He began writing, his pen scratching against the paper. "Resisting arrest, definitely. Assaulting an officer. You did take a swing at Kyle, didn't you?" He winked at his fellow officer. "That's a lie," Danielle protested, gripping the cell bars. "There are witnesses." "Witnesses?" Kyle laughed, joining Rick at the desk. "Ain't nobody saw nothing, right, Rick?" Rick nodded, continuing to write. "Disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, threatening an officer." He listed off charges like he was reading a menu, each one more fabricated than the last. The sound of dress shoes clicking against the floor drew their attention. Chief Darnell Holt appeared in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly combed despite the late hour. His presence seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, his calm voice somehow more threatening than Rick's loud threats. "I understand we have some federal agents causing trouble in my town." He picked up Rick's incomplete paperwork, reviewing it with practiced indifference. His eyes scanned the charges, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. My, quite a list of infractions." Dominique stepped forward in her cell. "Chief Holt, your officers physically assaulted us without cause, falsely arrested us, and are now fabricating charges. We demand—" "You demand nothing," Holt cut her off, his voice still eerily pleasant. He walked slowly between the cells, hands clasped behind his back. "You know, it's interesting. We get outsiders in here sometimes, thinking their fancy titles mean something, thinking they can come in and— what's the word? Investigate?" He stopped in front of Danielle's cell, studying her like a specimen under glass. "Bad things tend to happen to people who push too hard in my town. People disappear into the system. Paperwork gets lost. Charges multiply." His smile never reached his eyes. "Even FBI badges won't save you from that." The threat hung in the air like smoke, choking the oxygen from the room. Rick and Kyle exchanged satisfied smirks, enjoying the show their boss was putting on. "You can't intimidate us," Danielle said, her voice low and dangerous. "We've dealt with corrupt cops before." Holt chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Corrupt? That's such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as maintaining order." "My order." He straightened his tie. "You have a choice, ladies. You can take your disorderly conduct charges, spend the night here, and leave town tomorrow with your tails between your legs. Or—" he let the alternative hang unspoken. "Or what?" Dominique challenged. "You'll make us disappear? Add us to your collection of victims?" "Victims?" Holt's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "I don't see any victims here. Just 2 drunk women who attacked my officers and are now facing the consequences of their actions. That's what the paperwork will show, anyway." He handed the forms back to Rick. "Finish processing them. I want everything done by the book. Our book." With a final cold smile at the sisters, he turned to leave. Rick and Kyle returned to their paperwork, now emboldened by their chief's approval. The scratching of their pens mixed with their occasional laughter as they invented more details for their false report. Danielle pressed against the bars, separating her cell from Dominique's, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't about us," she said, watching her sister's face in the harsh fluorescent light. "It's about how many others they've buried." The hours crawled by like years. The station had grown quiet, with only the occasional shuffle of feet or distant phone ring breaking the silence. The clock now read 2:13 a.m., and the sisters had settled into a watchful waiting game. Danielle paced her cell, 6 steps forward, 6 steps back, her bare feet cold against the concrete floor. Their shoes had been taken during processing, along with their phones and jewelry. Standard procedure, they'd said, though nothing about this was standard. Dominique sat on her thin metal bunk, back straight against the wall, eyes focused on the hallway. Neither sister had spoken much since Chief Holt's threat, but their minds were racing, cataloging every detail, every face, every word spoken. The sound of soft footsteps drew their attention. A young officer appeared, carrying 2 paper bags and paper cups of water. Jenny Morales. They'd noticed her earlier, hovering at the edges of the booking area, her discomfort with the situation visible in her tense shoulders and averted eyes. "Dinner," she announced, loud enough for anyone listening to hear. "Standard issue sandwich and chips." Her voice dropped to barely above a breath as she approached Danielle's cell first. "Don't trust anyone here. This isn't the first time." Danielle accepted the paper bag, her fingers brushing against Morales's hand. She felt something slip between them, a small folded piece of paper. Without changing her expression, she let it slide into her palm. Morales moved to Dominique's cell, maintaining the pretense of routine food delivery. Her movements were careful, measured, as if being watched. "The water fountain's broken, so you'll have to make do with cups," she said at normal volume, then whispered, "They do this at least once a month, usually to black women passing through." Dominique took her meal, her face a mask of defeat for any watching eyes. "Thank you, officer," she said, slumping onto her bunk as if resigned to her situation. After Morales left, the sisters ate in silence, but their minds were racing. Danielle waited until she heard the night shift changing in the distance before carefully unfolding the note under her thin blanket. A phone number was written in tight, neat handwriting, followed by the words, "Emergency FBI contact, Deputy Director Marcus Chen." "They've done this before," Dominique murmured, her voice so low it was almost subvocal. "Multiple victims." "Multiple witnesses," Danielle corrected, equally quiet. She tore the edge of her paper bag, using it to memorize the phone number before eating the note. "We just need to survive the night." The sandwich was stale, the chips staler. But they ate everything. They needed their strength. Through the small window high in the wall, they could see the moon hanging like a watchful eye. A drunk was brought in around 3 a.m., his loud protests echoing through the holding area. Rick and Kyle appeared, roughing him up more than necessary before throwing him in a cell further down. They paused to leer at the sisters. "How are our FBI superstars doing?" Rick taunted, rapping his nightstick against the bars. "Not feeling so tough now, are you?" Danielle kept her eyes down, shoulders slumped. Dominique curled up on her bunk, turning her face to the wall. They heard Kyle laugh. "Look at that," he said. "All that attitude gone already. Maybe they're learning their place." "'Bout time," Rick agreed. "Chief was right. They ain't so special after all." The officer's footsteps faded away, followed by the sound of a door closing. The sisters remained in their poses of defeat until they were sure they were alone. "They're getting sloppy," Dominique whispered. "Overconfident?" Danielle nodded slightly. "Did you see the camera in the corner?" "It's just for show. The red light isn't on." "No recording system," Dominique confirmed. "They don't want evidence of what happens in here." "But that works both ways." Danielle shifted on her bunk, keeping her voice low. "They can't prove what we do or don't do either." The night stretched on, marked by the occasional check from the desk sergeant, clearly one of Holt's trusted men, given his smirk each time he passed. The sisters maintained their act of broken spirits, heads down, shoulders slumped, occasional sniffles for effect. Around 4 a.m. they heard Rick and Kyle returning from what sounded like another arrest. Their voices carried down the hallway, bourbon loud and unguarded. "Just like the Thompson girl last month," Kyle was saying. "These ones thought their fancy badges would save them." Nobody's badges mean nothing here, Rick laughed. Chief's got judges in his pocket all the way to the county line. The sisters exchanged glances in the dim light. Each new conversation was another piece of evidence, another thread in the web they were beginning to understand. This wasn't just about power-hungry cops. This was systematic, organized, protected. As dawn approached, they could hear the station beginning to wake up. The day shift would be arriving soon, bringing new eyes and new opportunities. They had to play this smart, had to make everyone believe they were exactly what they wanted. 2 more broken victims added to their collection. Dominique shifted closer to the bars separating their cells, her voice barely a whisper. They think we're broken. Let's use that. The first rays of morning light crept through the high window, painting pale squares on the concrete floor. Danielle and Dominique lay still on their bunks, breathing steady and deep, appearing to have finally succumbed to exhaustion. In reality, every sense was alert, gathering intelligence. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, accompanied by the clink of glass bottles. Rick's voice carried clearly through the station's night-quiet halls. Man, I needed this after dealing with those stuck-up feds. Hell yeah, Kyle agreed, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. Bourbon makes everything better. Mark's voice joined in, slightly slurred. Remember that family on Oak Street last summer? The way that mother cried when we found that bag of pills in her son's room? Danielle kept her breathing steady, though her heart raced. The hidden microphone sewn into her bra strap, standard FBI equipment they hadn't thought to check for, was picking up every word. She shifted slightly, angling her body to better capture the conversation. That was classic, Rick chuckled, ice cubes clinking in his glass. Kids swore up and down they weren't his. But who's gonna believe some black teenager over 3 officers of the law? 5 years minimum, Kyle added proudly. That's another one off the streets. Chief says we're doing God's work, Mark said, keeping the neighborhood clean. That's what he told the mayor last month at the fundraiser. Dominique's mind worked like a computer, cataloging names, dates, locations. Her FBI training had honed her memory to near perfection. Every detail could be crucial. The mother's tears, the planted evidence, the fundraiser connection. Speaking of cleaning up, Rick continued, his chair scraping against the floor as he leaned forward. Remember the Williams family? 3 generations living in that house on Maple. Until we got creative with that property seizure, Kyle laughed. Now it's that nice new coffee shop. Development company sure was grateful, Mark added. That envelope the chief got wasn't exactly thin. The bourbon kept flowing, loosening their tongues further. Stories spilled out like poison. Falsified reports, planted weapons, convenient computer errors that made evidence disappear. Each confession was another nail in their coffin, recorded in crisp digital quality. Danielle fought to keep her breathing steady as her anger built. These weren't just corrupt cops. They were orchestrating the systematic destruction of black families, black futures, black lives. Her hidden mic caught it all. Dates, names, specific incidents. Hey, you remember that teacher? Kyle's voice got louder as he grew more drunk. The one who tried to file that complaint about us roughing up her student? Man, that was smooth, Rick replied. 1 little bag of cocaine in her desk drawer, and suddenly she's not so credible anymore. Lost her license and everything. Chief called it preventive maintenance, Mark added with a harsh laugh. Can't have people thinking they can challenge us. Through barely open eyes, Dominique watched their reflections in the polished metal toilet. 3 men, badges still pinned to their chest, drinking stolen bourbon and laughing about destroyed lives. She memorized their gestures, their specific words, the way Rick led the conversations and Kyle eagerly followed. Remember that grandmother last month? Kyle was saying now. The one who kept filing complaints about police harassment? Yeah, her grandson's doing 15 years, Rick replied proudly. Amazing what you can do with a little creativity and an unregistered gun. She shut up real quick after that, Mark added. They all do, eventually. The conversation drifted into technical details. Which judges were in their pocket, which evidence lockers had faulty cameras, which desk sergeants could be trusted to lose paperwork. Each word was another thread in the web of corruption they were mapping. A door opened somewhere in the station, and the men quickly gathered their bottles. Shift change soon, Rick muttered. Better clear this out. What about them? Kyle asked, nodding toward the cells. Think they learned their lesson? Oh, yeah, Rick said confidently. Look at them, out cold. By morning, they'll be begging to drop everything and leave town, just like all the others. Their footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of bottles being hidden and chairs scraped back into place. The station began to show signs of waking. Distant phones ringing, doors opening and closing, voices carrying from the front desk. When the corridor was completely clear, Danielle opened her eyes fully, meeting her sister's gaze. They didn't need words to communicate. They'd been doing this their whole lives. Dominique raised an eyebrow slightly, asking the silent question, Did you get it all? Danielle gave an almost imperceptible nod. Hours of drunken confessions, all captured in perfect digital quality. Names, dates, specific crimes, enough to start an investigation that would rip the roof off this corrupt department. But they had to be smart. One wrong move, and that evidence would disappear, just like all the other evidence these men had made vanish over the years. They needed to get the recording out, needed to contact Deputy Director Chen, needed to protect their proof. The sisters lay still as early morning light filled their cells. Their bodies appeared defeated, their spirits seemingly crushed. Exactly what their captors wanted to see. But beneath that careful facade, their minds were racing, planning, coordinating without words. Danielle shifted slightly closer to the bars between their cells. We've got them, she breathed, her lips barely moving. All we need is the right moment. The morning shift brought new faces and fresh cruelty. Officers paraded past their cells, some sneering, others pointedly ignoring them. But one face stood out, Officer Jenny Morales, her dark eyes carrying a hint of sympathy beneath her professional mask. She waited until the corridor cleared before approaching with their breakfast trays. Eat quickly, she whispered, sliding the bland oatmeal through the slots. I can get you to a phone, but we have to time this perfectly. Danielle studied the young officer's face, looking for any sign of deception. But Morales's hands trembled slightly as she straightened her uniform. The gesture of someone taking a real risk, not setting a trap. Why help us? Dominique asked softly, stirring her oatmeal without eating it. Morales glanced over her shoulder before responding. Because I've seen what they do, how they destroy people, and I'm tired of being part of it. She explained her plan in quick, hushed sentences. The ancient landline in the file room, rarely used now that everyone had cells. The 10-minute gap between shift changes. The camera blind spot behind the metal filing cabinets. I'll create a distraction, Morales promised. You'll have maybe 5 minutes. Make them count. The sisters shared a look, weighing their options. The recording was burning a hole in Danielle's hidden mic, but without outside help, it might never see the light of day. They needed an ally higher up, someone with real power. When shift change came, Morales's timing was perfect. A crash echoed from the front desk, followed by shouting about spilled coffee and ruined paperwork. Keys jingled quietly in their cell locks. Now, Morales hissed, leading them quickly down the back corridor. The file room smelled of dust and forgotten papers. Morales pointed to the phone tucked behind a cabinet, then took up position by the door. Hurry! Danielle's fingers shook slightly as she dialed Keen's direct line. Her supervisor had always seemed fair, had promoted them despite pushback from others in the bureau. If anyone would help, it would be him. The line rang 3 times before Keen's familiar voice answered. This is Keen. Sir, it's Agent Danielle Carter, she whispered, hunching close to the receiver. We need help. We're being held. Carter? Keene cut in, his tone strange. Where are you calling from? Local station. Sir, we have evidence of massive corruption. Multiple officers on tape confessing to… Stop. Keene's voice had gone cold. Don't say another word. Something in his tone made Danielle's stomach clench. Sir? I've already heard from Chief Holt, Keene said. He tells me you two caused quite a scene. Assaulting officers, resisting arrest. That's not what happened, Danielle protested. We have proof. Listen carefully, Keene interrupted. Whatever recording you think you have, whatever evidence you believe you've gathered, forget it. Drop this now, while you still can. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Dominique, listening close to the receiver, went rigid with shock. They're corrupt, Danielle pushed back. They're destroying lives, and you're going to help them cover it up? I'm trying to help you, Keene insisted. But his voice carried the oily tone of a man protecting himself. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Take the warning and walk away. Sir, that's an order, Agent Carter. The line went dead. Morales appeared in the doorway, face tight with urgency. Someone's coming. We have to move. They barely made it back to their cells before heavy footsteps approached. Rick's massive frame filled the corridor, his face split by a cruel grin. He was holding something. A phone. Their blood ran cold as he held it up, displaying a text message. Well, well, he drawled. Just got an interesting call from your FBI boss. Real understanding guy, that Keene. Says you two are problem agents, always causing trouble. Says we should handle this locally. Dominique exploded forward, her fists striking the cell bars with enough force to make them ring. The sound echoed through the station like a bell of rage. You corrupt piece of… Now. Rick cut her off, wagging his finger. Is that any way to talk to an officer of the law? Especially after your own superior confirmed what troublemakers you are. Danielle stood perfectly still, her fury running so deep it had crystallized into something cold and sharp. They had counted on Keene, trusted him, believed in the system he represented. His betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal of everything the badge was supposed to stand for. What's wrong? Rick taunted. Realizing nobody's coming to save you? That's right. You're all alone here. No backup, no cavalry, no justice. Just us, teaching you your place. He strutted closer to Dominique's cell, clearly enjoying her rage. Your boss sends his regards, by the way. Says we should take our time. Make sure the lesson really sinks in. Dominique's knuckles were bleeding from striking the bars, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes burned with a fury that made even Rick step back slightly. But it was Danielle's response that sent a chill through the corridor. No outburst, no threats, just 4 words, spoken with deadly calm. Then we burn them all. The intensity in her voice made Rick's smirk falter for just a moment. Because it wasn't the threat of a desperate prisoner. It was a promise from someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. He covered his unease with a harsh laugh and walked away, but the sisters' eyes followed him. They had lost their ally in the Bureau, lost their faith in the system, lost every option except one, taking down the entire corrupt machine, no matter the cost. Later that night, Morales slipped back to their cells, her steps quick but cautious. I have a message, she whispered, pretending to check their restraints. Luis, the bartender, he wants you to know he has something. Something important. Danielle leaned closer to the bars. What do you mean? He had cameras, Morales explained softly. Hidden ones, for security. The night at the bar, he got everything. But he needs help getting the footage out safely. Hope flickered in Dominique's eyes. Can you arrange contact? Morales nodded slightly. I know someone. Maya Green, investigative journalist. She's been trying to expose corruption here for years, but nobody would talk. Until now. The next day, Maya arrived under the pretense of interviewing the sisters about their Criminal behavior. The guards let her in, smirking at what they assumed would be another hit piece against two troublemaking FBI agents. Maya was sharp-featured and intense, her pressed blazer at odds with the grimy interview room. She set up her recorder with practiced efficiency, then leaned in close. "Luis contacted me," she whispered, pretending to adjust her microphone. "I've seen the footage, but there's more. So much more. Judge Wilkes has been collecting evidence for years." "Clarence Wilkes?" Danielle asked quietly. "The retired circuit judge?" Maya nodded. "He's been documenting cases of police corruption since before you two were born. Watching, waiting for the right moment, for someone brave enough to take them on." She pulled out a legal pad, ostensibly taking notes for her article. But what she wrote made both sisters' eyes widen. "Meeting tonight. Wilkes's house. Luis bringing footage. I have files, police scanner frequencies, badge numbers, bank records." Dominique glanced at the guard outside, then mouthed silently, "How?" "Morales," Maya wrote. "She's helping coordinate. We have 2 hours during shift change. Timeline critical." The rest of the interview proceeded normally, Maya asking pointed questions while the sisters gave carefully vague answers. But underneath, plans were forming, hope building like a slow tide. That evening, everything aligned perfectly. During shift change, Morales accidentally disabled the cell block cameras for maintenance. The sisters were moved to separate holding rooms for questioning, rooms with windows facing the parking lot. Within minutes, they were in Maya's car, crouched low beneath blankets as she drove calmly past the station's security checkpoint. The guard barely glanced at her press pass. Judge Wilkes's house was modest but well kept, set back from the road behind old oak trees. The judge himself answered the door, tall and dignified despite his age, with kind eyes that carried decades of witnessed injustice. "Welcome," he said simply, ushering them inside. "We have much to discuss." Luis was already there, his laptop open on the dining room table. "I have everything," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Not just that night. Years of footage, them bragging about planted evidence, beating suspects, shaking down businesses. The judge nodded grimly. "And I have the court records to match. Cases where evidence appeared mysteriously. Witnesses who changed their stories after conversations with officers. Patterns of targeted harassment against minority communities." Maya spread her own files across the table. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Suspicious property purchases. A network of corruption reaching all the way up to state level. "And now we have proof of FBI involvement," Danielle added, thinking of Keene's betrayal. They worked through the night, piecing together evidence, building connections, documenting patterns. Luis's footage provided faces and confessions. The judge's records showed the legal framework of corruption. Maya's financial investigations exposed the money trail. "Look at this," Dominique said, pointing to a pattern in the arrest records. "Every time someone tried to speak up, they were arrested within days. Then their lives were systematically destroyed. Jobs lost, families harassed, homes foreclosed. They're not just corrupt," the judge said heavily. "They're organized, efficient. This is generations of systematic oppression, refined into a machine." "But machines can be broken," Maya countered, her eyes bright with purpose. "We have what we need. Real evidence, multiple sources, irrefutable proof." Luis nodded firmly. "And witnesses. People are ready to talk now. They just needed to know they weren't alone." The judge smiled slightly. "In all my years on the bench, I've never seen a case this strong. Or people this determined to see justice done." The night wore on. Papers covered every surface. Laptops hummed. Phones buzzed with messages from more people coming forward, each with their own piece of the puzzle, their own story of injustice. As dawn approached, Dominique stood by the window, watching the sky lighten. The weight of all they'd learned, all they were fighting for, settled on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. She turned to the room, to these allies who had risked everything to help them, to her sister who had never wavered, to the growing stack of evidence that would expose decades of corruption. "We're fighting for more than just us now," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. The others looked up, seeing in her face the same fire that burned in their own hearts, the unshakable belief that justice, though long delayed, would finally be served. Maya's heels clicked against the pavement as she hurried to her car. The night air was thick with humidity, and streetlights cast long shadows across the empty parking lot. Her briefcase was heavy with evidence: photos, documents, USB drives filled with Luis's recordings. She didn't notice the dark van until it was too late. Two men in ski masks jumped out. Maya turned to run, but a third man appeared behind her. She swung her briefcase, landing a solid hit, but they overwhelmed her quickly. The sound of fists hitting flesh echoed in the darkness. "Should have minded your own business," one attacker growled, stomping on her laptop and phone. They left her bleeding on the asphalt, taking her briefcase and everything in it. A passing driver found her 20 minutes later and called 911. At the hospital, Maya lay unconscious, tubes snaking from her arms. Her face was swollen, ribs cracked, right arm broken in 2 places. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. Across town, Luis was closing up his bar when he smelled smoke. He ran to the back room and found flames already climbing the walls, feeding on gasoline someone had poured everywhere. The fire spread impossibly fast. He tried to reach his office. His laptop was there, with copies of everything. But the heat pushed him back. Smoke filled his lungs. The crackle of flames turned into a roar. Luis barely made it out before the building collapsed. He stood in the street, coughing and watching his livelihood burn. Fire trucks arrived, but it was too late. The bar was gone, and with it, years of recorded evidence. Officer Rick Dalton watched from his patrol car across the street, a satisfied smile on his face. In their cells, Danielle and Dominique learned about Maya and Luis from Officer Morales, who looked pale and shaken as she whispered the news. "Maya's in intensive care," she said quietly. "Luis lost everything. And they're saying—" She swallowed hard. "They're saying you two arranged it all from in here. New charges are being filed: conspiracy, arson, attempted murder." Danielle's hands clenched into fists. "That's insane. We've been locked up. They're claiming you have outside accomplices," Morales explained. "They've got witnesses who'll swear they heard you planning it during visiting hours." "More lies," Dominique said bitterly. "More false witnesses." Chief Holt appeared then, looking smug. "Quite a night," he said, tapping his baton against the bars. "Shame about your friends, but that's what happens when people don't know their place." He slid copies of the new charges through the slots. "You'll be transferred to maximum security tomorrow. Can't have dangerous arsonists in our little jail, can we?" After he left, Danielle read through the paperwork, her jaw tight with anger. The charges were elaborate, detailed, a complete fabrication built on false statements and manufactured evidence. "Look at this," she said to Dominique. "They've got fake phone records showing calls between us and unknown conspirators. Bank transfers that never happened. They've been planning this." Dominique studied the papers. "The dates are wrong," she noticed. "They rushed it, got sloppy." "Not that it matters," Danielle replied. "They control everything: the evidence, the witnesses, the system itself." A guard brought their dinner: cold bologna sandwiches and weak coffee. Neither sister touched the food. "Maya knew too much," Dominique said quietly. "The financial records, the offshore accounts. She could trace the money." "And Luis had video proof," Danielle added. "Years of them discussing crimes right there in his bar, thinking no one was recording." They fell silent as heavy footsteps approached. Rick and Kyle swaggered past, making a show of checking the locks. "Sleep tight, ladies," Rick called. "Tomorrow's gonna be a long day." Hope you like prison food." When they were gone, Dominique moved closer to the bars separating their cells. "What about Judge Wilkes? His records?" "Morales says his house was broken into this afternoon," Danielle replied. "Everything taken. They're thorough, I'll give them that." The sisters sat in silence as night settled over the jail. Somewhere, a prisoner sobbed. Keys jingled as guards made their rounds. "We knew they'd fight back," Dominique said finally. "Knew they'd try to silence everyone. But this—" Danielle gestured at the charges. "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. They're panicking." A cockroach scuttled across the floor between their cells. Dominique watched it disappear into a crack in the wall. "Maya will recover," she said. "Luis will rebuild. We're not finished." "No," Danielle agreed. "We're not. And neither are they. This is just the beginning of how far they'll go to keep their power." Through the narrow window, they could see stars appearing in the darkening sky. The same stars they'd watched as children, dreaming of justice, swearing to fight against bullies and corruption. Dominique reached through the bars. Danielle clasped her hand tightly. "They're desperate," Danielle said, her voice hard with determination. "Which means we're close." Their joined hands were a promise, a defiance, a reminder that even in darkness, they were not alone. The sisters held on, drawing strength from each other as they had always done, preparing for whatever came next. The rattling of keys woke Danielle from a fitful sleep. 3 shadows loomed outside her cell: Rick, Mark, and Kyle, their faces twisted with cruel anticipation. "Rise and shine, FBI," Rick sneered, unlocking her door. "Time for a little field trip." Danielle's muscles tensed as Mark yanked her roughly to her feet. In the next cell, Kyle was doing the same to Dominique. The sisters exchanged quick glances, reading each other's thoughts without words. "Where are you taking us?" Dominique demanded as Kyle shoved her forward. Rick laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. Somewhere quiet, somewhere private. They were marched through empty corridors, their bare feet cold against the floor. The night guard's desk was empty, no witnesses to their removal. Outside, the summer air was thick and heavy. A white van waited in the shadows, its engine idling. The sisters were pushed inside, landing hard on the metal floor. No seats, no windows, just darkness and the smell of oil and rust. Mark climbed in back with them, while Rick took the wheel and Kyle rode shotgun. The van lurched forward, tires crunching on gravel. "You know what your problem is?" Rick called from the front seat. "You thought your fancy badges made you untouchable. Thought you could come into my town and start digging up trouble." The van hit a pothole, making everyone bounce. Danielle's shoulders slammed into the wall. "Your town?" she shot back. "You mean your personal playground? Where you can abuse whoever you want?" Mark's backhand caught her across the face. "Shut your mouth. Touch her again," Dominique growled. "And I'll—" "You'll what?" Kyle twisted around in his seat, grinning. "We own this county. Police, judges, even your precious FBI supervisor. They all play by our rules." The van turned onto a rough road, branches scraping the sides. Through the windshield, Danielle glimpsed trees pressing close, their leaves black against the starlit sky. "Nobody knows where you are," Rick said. "Nobody's coming to help. By morning, you'll just be 2 more missing persons cases. Maybe they'll find pieces of you in the swamp. Maybe not." The sisters sat back to back, drawing strength from each other's presence. Danielle felt Dominique's fingers brush hers, a silent signal they'd used since childhood. Stay alert. Wait for an opening. After 20 minutes of bumpy road, the van stopped. When the back doors opened, the smell of stagnant water and rotting vegetation filled the air. An abandoned warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows like empty eye sockets in the moonlight. "Home, sweet home," Rick announced, shoving them toward the building. "At least for the next hour or so. That's about how long it'll take for the gators to clean up after we're done." Inside, moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting strange shadows on debris-strewn concrete. Rusty machinery hulked in the corners like sleeping monsters. Mark produced a flashlight, sweeping its beam across empty oil drums and fallen beams. Rats scurried away from the light. "Perfect spot," Kyle said. "Nobody's been out here in years. Nobody to hear anything." Rick circled the sisters slowly, enjoying their vulnerability. "You know what I love about this job? Getting to put arrogant scums in their place, especially ones who think having dark skin and a badge makes them special." "Is that what this is about?" Danielle asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You can't stand seeing black women with authority?" "This is about respect," Rick snarled. "About knowing your place in the natural order." "Natural order?" Dominique laughed harshly. "You mean white men with badges getting away with murder?" Kyle kicked her legs out from under her. She fell hard, but immediately started to rise. Mark's boot on her back kept her down. "I've waited a long time for this," Rick said, drawing his service weapon. "Ever since you two walked into that bar, acting all superior, like you were better than us." "We are better than you," Danielle said coldly. "We protect people. You prey on them." Rick's face darkened with rage. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. The gun's barrel pressed against her temple, cold and final. "Any last words, FBI?" he whispered. "Any clever comments about justice? About right and wrong?" Danielle stared straight ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing fear in her eyes. She felt Dominique tense behind her, ready to move despite Mark's boot. The gun pressed harder, metal biting into skin. Rick's finger tightened on the trigger. Rick's finger tensed on the trigger, but Danielle's sharp laugh cut through the tension. "What's wrong, Rick? Need a gun to feel strong? Can't handle two women without backup?" His hand trembled slightly. Drunk and angry, his control was slipping. "Shut up. Or what? You'll prove what a big man you are by shooting an unarmed woman?" Danielle's voice dripped with contempt. "That's your style, isn't it? Picking on people who can't fight back?" Behind her, Dominique slowly worked the hair clip from her braids, while Mark's attention was fixed on Danielle's words. Her fingers moved carefully, feeling for the handcuff's lock. "You think you're so smart?" Rick growled, pressing the gun harder. "Think you can talk your way out of this?" "No, I think you're a coward," Danielle continued, noting how his rage made him step closer. "A small man with a badge, terrorizing people because it's the only way you can feel powerful." Kyle shifted uneasily. "Just shut her up already." "What's wrong, Kyle?" Danielle taunted. "Getting nervous? Worried someone might actually stand up to you for once?" Mark's boot lifted slightly as he turned toward the argument. That was all Dominique needed. The handcuff clicked open. "You know what your problem is?" Danielle kept pushing. "You're used to people being afraid. Used to them backing down. But we're not afraid of you." Rick's face twisted. "You should be. Why? Because you've got a gun? Because you've got drunk friends to hold us down?" Danielle's eyes blazed. "That just proves how weak you really are." With a roar of rage, Rick swung the gun to strike her face. But Danielle was ready. She ducked, the weapon whistling past her ear. In the same instant, Dominique exploded upward, driving her elbow into Mark's gut. He doubled over with a grunt of pain. Kyle lunged forward, but Danielle's leg swept out, catching his ankle. He crashed to the floor, his head cracking against concrete. Rick tried to bring the gun back around, but Dominique was already moving. Her palm struck his wrist, sending the weapon spinning into the darkness. "You bit!" His curse was cut short by Danielle's fist connecting with his jaw. Mark recovered his breath and charged, but the sisters moved in perfect sync. Dominique stepped left while Danielle went right, their FBI combat training taking over. Mark's wild punch met empty air. Dominique grabbed his extended arm, using his momentum to flip him over her hip. He landed hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. Kyle staggered up, blood running from a cut on his forehead. He pulled his baton, swinging it in a vicious arc. Danielle blocked with her forearm, gritting her teeth against the pain. Her knee drove up into his groin, dropping him to the floor. Rick bellowed like a wounded bull, throwing haymaker punches. But his drunken swings were slow and clumsy. The sisters dodged and weaved, landing precise strikes to vulnerable points: throat, solar plexus, kidneys. "Not so tough without your gun, are you?" Danielle taunted as she ducked another wild swing. Mark tried to grab Dominique from behind, but she was ready. Her head snapped back, catching his nose with a crunch. As he reeled, she spun and drove her knee into his ribs. Kyle struggled up again, fumbling for his pepper spray. Danielle's kick sent it flying from his hand. Her follow-up punch laid him out cold. Rick managed to land a glancing blow to Dominique's shoulder, but she rolled with it, converting the momentum into a spinning kick that caught him in the temple. He stumbled, dazed. Mark pulled his backup piece, but Danielle was too close. Her hands locked around his wrist, twisting sharply. The gun clattered to the floor as bones snapped. His scream echoed off the warehouse walls. Through it all, the sisters moved like dancers in a deadly ballet, each anticipating the other's moves, creating openings, covering blind spots. Years of training and shared instincts made them devastating against the drunken, undisciplined cops. Rick tried to bull rush Dominique, but she sidestepped smoothly. His own momentum carried him into a support beam with a resounding clang. He slumped to his knees, vision swimming. Kyle stirred feebly, but stayed down, while Mark cradled his broken wrist, moaning. Dominique retrieved Rick's dropped handcuffs, approaching him as he knelt dazed on the concrete. The metal clicked shut around his wrists, tight enough to bite. "Welcome to our world," she said coldly. "How does it feel to be helpless?" Danielle stood over him, voice hard with triumph. "Checkmate." Rick's eyes were unfocused, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. The warehouse was silent except for harsh breathing and Kyle's quiet groans. The mighty sergeant, so full of swagger and menace just minutes before, knelt defeated on the filthy floor. His own handcuffs bound him, while his backup lay unconscious or injured. The tables had turned completely. The sisters stood tall, breathing hard but victorious. Despite bruises and scrapes, they were unbroken. Their FBI training, combined with the strength born of years facing down bullies and bigots, had proven superior to drunken brutality. Rick's head slumped forward in defeat, his bravado finally shattered. The natural order he'd bragged about had been upended. The predator had become prey. Danielle pulled a small device from her boot, a modified body camera that had survived the pat-downs. With practiced moves, she activated the FBI uplink system, its tiny red light blinking to life. "What's that?" Rick slurred, squinting at the light through his bloody haze. "Your confession booth," Danielle said coldly. She positioned the camera carefully, making sure it captured all three officers. "Everything you say is streaming live to FBI servers. And the internet." Rick's face twisted with rage. "You're bluffing!" "Am I?" Danielle held up her phone, showing the live feed. "Right now, thousands of people are watching, including your superiors." Kyle's eyes widened with sudden fear. "Turn it off!" He tried to lunge forward but fell back, still dizzy from the fight. "Why?" Dominique asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Worried about people seeing the real you? The brave officers who kidnap women and threaten to kill them?" Mark cradled his broken wrist, shaking his head. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can," Danielle said. "Your phone GPS puts you here. The warehouse security cameras caught you dragging us inside. And now," she smiled coldly, "now we have you live." Dominique circled behind Rick, her steps measured and calm. "Tell them about the other women, Rick. The ones you've terrorized over the years. The evidence you planted. The lives you've ruined." "I don't know what you're talking about," Rick spat, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "No?" Danielle moved closer, her voice hard. "What about Maria Rodriguez?" The drugs you planted in her car before deporting her, separating her from her kids. Or James Washington, the college student you framed for assault? Rick's face paled. That's all lies. Then what about tonight? Dominique pressed. Tell the camera why you really arrested us. Was it because we broke any laws, or because we wouldn't let you grope us? Across town, Officer Jenny Morales sat at her desk, carefully monitoring the live feed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, sharing the stream to key social media platforms and news outlets. She had waited years for this moment, documenting the department's corruption in secret. Now, finally, the truth would come out. You think you're so special, Rick sneered at the camera, his drunken state loosening his tongue. Coming into my town with your FBI badges, thinking you can change things. This is how it's always been, how it should be. And how's that, Rick? Danielle prompted, knowing he was about to hang himself with his own words. Keeping people in their place, he shouted. These streets were peaceful before their kind started getting uppity, thinking they deserve rights, deserve respect. He spat the words like poison. Kyle tried to shut him up, but Rick was too far gone, too drunk and angry to stop. You know how many of them we've put away? He continued, laughing darkly. Plant a little evidence here. Rough them up there. They learn real quick who's in charge. Morales watched the viewer count explode as she shared the feed. Local news stations picked it up first, then national outlets. The hashtag #ChockerCorruptCops started trending. She sent anonymous tips to key journalists, ensuring the story couldn't be buried. Tell them about the quotas, Rick, Dominique said quietly. About targeting specific neighborhoods. Someone has to keep those areas in line, he growled. Chief knows it. Department knows it. Hell, even your precious FBI knows it. Why do you think your supervisor warned us you were calling? Danielle's eyes narrowed. So you admit Supervisor Keene is working with you? Rick's drunken brain caught up too late. His face contorted with rage as he realized what he'd revealed. You set me up, he screamed, struggling against the cuffs. You tricked me. No, Rick, Danielle said calmly. We just gave you enough rope to hang yourself. Everything you've said is your truth. Your real face. The warehouse doors burst open as FBI tactical teams swarmed in, followed by state police. Morales had made sure the feed reached the right people. This is all lies, Rick screamed into the camera as agents surrounded him. They attacked us. They're the criminals. But the evidence was undeniable. The live stream had caught everything. His threats, his confessions, his racist rants. Millions had watched him reveal the ugly truth behind his badge. The sisters stood side by side, watching coldly as Rick continued to rave. His power was gone, stripped away by his own words and actions. The camera kept rolling, documenting his final meltdown for the world to see. You're under arrest, a senior FBI agent announced, reading Rick his rights as other agents secured Kyle and Mark. You can't do this to me, Rick thrashed against the cuffs. I'm a police officer. Not anymore, Dominique said softly. Danielle kept the camera steady, ensuring every second was captured. Across the internet, comments and shares exploded. The story was breaking wide open, and there would be no containing it this time. In the police station, Morales smiled grimly as she watched other officers frantically trying to damage control. But it was too late. The truth was out, streaming across millions of screens. Rick's eyes locked onto the camera one last time, filled with impotent rage. This is all lies, he screamed as agents began leading him away. The sisters simply stared back at him, their expressions cold and satisfied. Justice, so long denied, was finally being served. The morning sun blazed over the small town as federal vehicles swarmed the streets. Black SUVs and tactical units converged on the police station, their lights flashing against the brick walls. News vans lined the sidewalks, cameras rolling as the story that had exploded overnight continued to unfold. Chief Darnell Holt sat in his office, watching the chaos through his blinds. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the warehouse live stream went viral. Mayors, commissioners, reporters, all demanding answers he couldn't give. His carefully constructed empire of lies was crumbling. The door burst open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn. "Chief Darnell Holt," the lead agent announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations." Holt's face remained stoic as they cuffed him, but his hands trembled slightly. News cameras tracked his walk of shame through the station. Officers who had feared him for years now turned away, avoiding his gaze. Some were already talking to federal investigators, eager to save themselves. "No comment," Holt muttered as reporters shouted questions. But his carefully crafted image as the town's protector shattered with each flash of the cameras. Across town at the FBI field office, Robert Keene's world imploded just as spectacularly. He sat rigid in his chair as internal affairs agents boxed up his awards and credentials. 25 years of service, he said quietly. "Gone because of those sisters." "Gone because you betrayed your badge," the internal affairs agent corrected, dropping a thick indictment on his desk. "Conspiracy, obstruction, abuse of power. The evidence is overwhelming." Keene's face reddened. "I was protecting established relationships. You were protecting corrupt cops who terrorized innocent people." The agent cut him off. "And you did it for years." Outside the field office, reporters captured Keene's disgrace as he was led out in handcuffs. His polished appearance had crumbled. His tie hung loose, his hair disheveled. The man who had built his career on loyalty to power now had no one loyal to him. At the county jail, Rick, Mark, and Kyle were processed into cells, their badges and uniforms replaced with orange jumpsuits. Rick's face was plastered across every news channel, his drunken confessions playing on repeat. His racist rants had become a national symbol of police corruption. "My life is over," Kyle whimpered in his cell. "Should have thought about that before you helped kidnap federal agents," his guard replied coldly. Mark sat silent in his cell, cradling his broken wrist, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. The power he had wielded so carelessly was gone. Now he was just another inmate, waiting for justice to grind him down. As federal agents combed through years of corrupt files, the town's residents took to the streets. What started as a small gathering outside the police station swelled into hundreds, then thousands. Black residents who had suffered silently for years found their voices. "No more fear," they chanted. Carter sisters showed the way. Mrs. Washington, mother of the college student Rick had framed, stood at the front of the crowd. "My boy lost 3 years of his life because of their lies," she told news cameras, tears streaming down her face. "But today, the truth is finally out." Retired Judge Wilkes addressed the protesters, his voice strong despite his age. "I saw the corruption from the bench, but they threatened anyone who spoke up. The Carter sisters did what many of us couldn't. They stood their ground and exposed the truth." Luis, the bartender whose hidden recording had helped build the case, received a standing ovation from the crowd. His bar might have burned, but his courage had helped spark a revolution. Officer Jenny Morales walked out of the police station, turning in her badge. "I can't serve in a corrupt system," she announced. "It's time to rebuild from the ground up." The crowd parted as Danielle and Dominique emerged from the federal building. They had refused to change clothes, still wearing the shorts and tops from that fateful night at the bar. Their bruises were visible, but their heads were high. The sisters paused at the top of the steps, taking in the scene. Signs bearing their names waved above the crowd. Phones recorded their every move. But it was the faces that struck them. Faces full of hope, of vindication, of long-awaited justice. "When they assaulted us in that bar," Danielle addressed the crowd, her voice carrying across the square, "they thought we would be easy victims. They were wrong. But this isn't about us, Dominique added. This is about every person they've terrorized, every life they've tried to destroy, every voice they tried to silence. The crowd roared in response. Elderly residents who remembered segregation wiped tears from their eyes. Young activists raised their fists in solidarity. The sisters had given them all something precious, proof that the powerful could fall. Together, Danielle and Dominique descended the steps into the waiting crowd. People reached out to touch them, to thank them, to share their own stories of abuse at the hands of corrupt officers. Mrs. Washington hugged them both. "You gave us our dignity back," she whispered. The sisters moved through the crowd, accepting embraces and words of gratitude. They had come home to expose corruption and found a community ready to rise. Behind them, the corrupt system they'd exposed continued to crumble. But here, surrounded by the people they'd helped liberate, Danielle and Dominique Carter walked with their heads high, unbroken and unbowed. 3 weeks after the arrests, the old community hall buzzed with energy. Every wooden chair was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The worn floorboards creaked under the weight of so many bodies, and the evening light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across eager faces. Maya Green stood at the podium, her notebook open before her. The bruises from her attack had faded, but her determination burned brighter than ever. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the crowd that had gathered to hear the truth finally spoken aloud. "Tomorrow, my full investigation hits the press," she announced, her voice firm and clear. 6 months of digging, hundreds of interviews, and thousands of documents. We're exposing every false arrest, every planted evidence case, every instance of brutality that was covered up. The crowd murmured, a mix of pain and vindication in their responses. An elderly man in the front row nodded slowly, tears streaming down his weathered face. His grandson had spent 5 years in prison on fabricated charges. "The story doesn't end with Rick Dalton and his cronies," Maya continued, flipping through her notes. "We've uncovered a network of corruption spanning 3 decades. Judges who looked the other way, prosecutors who buried evidence, politicians who profited from our silence." She paused, making eye contact with faces in the crowd. "But most importantly, this story is about you. The mothers who lost sons to false charges, the business owners who paid protection money, the witnesses who were threatened into silence. Your voices are finally being heard." Judge Clarence Wilkes rose from his seat, his tall frame still commanding respect despite his age. He made his way to the podium with measured steps, each one echoing in the attentive silence. "I sat on that bench for 30 years, he began, his deep voice resonating through the hall. "Watched good people get crushed by a system that was meant to protect them. Every time I tried to speak up, they threatened to destroy my family." He gripped the podium, his knuckles whitening. "But those days are over. Chief Holt's network is exposed. His allies are scrambling to save themselves. Federal investigators are reopening hundreds of cases." His voice swelled with emotion. "This town is ours again." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People hugged each other, some crying openly. Mrs. Washington stood up, raising her son's college acceptance letter. He'd been released and cleared of all charges, ready to restart his life. Officer Jenny Morales, now working with the federal task force, shared updates on the investigation. 17 officers have been indicted so far. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is establishing a permanent presence here. We're rebuilding the department from scratch, with community oversight. Luis, still operating his bar from a temporary location while rebuilding, spoke about the night that started it all. When those officers attacked the Carter sisters, they thought it would be just another abuse of power. Instead, it became their downfall. The crowd turned as Danielle and Dominique Carter entered from the back, making their way to the front. They moved through the audience, accepting hugs and words of gratitude. Their presence commanded attention, not from fear like the corrupt officers had used, but from earned respect. Danielle took the podium first, her FBI badge glinting under the hall's lights. When we came home that night, we were just two sisters wanting a quiet drink, she began, her voice carrying to every corner. But what happened to us had happened to so many others. The only difference was we had the training and resources to fight back. She paused, looking at the faces before her. Justice is never given, she declared, her words ringing with conviction. It's fought for. Every day, in every way possible. Sometimes with badges and courts, sometimes with cameras and protests, sometimes with simple courage to speak truth to power. Dominique joined her sister, their shoulders touching in solidarity. The men who attacked us thought their badges made them untouchable, she added. They were wrong. No one is above the law, and no one is beneath justice. She smiled, gentle but determined. And tonight, we fought for all of us. For every person they tried to break, every family they tried to destroy, every truth they tried to bury. The hall filled with applause again, people rising to their feet. Young activists who had organized the protests stood beside elderly residents who had endured decades of abuse. United in victory, united in determination to prevent it from happening again. Maya returned to the podium, holding up advance copies of her exposé. Tomorrow, the whole country will know what happened here. But more importantly, they'll know how we fought back, how a community found its voice and demanded better. Judge Wilkes nodded solemnly. This isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about building something better. A justice system that serves everyone equally. A police force that protects rather than terrorizes. A community where truth matters more than power. As the meeting wound down, people lingered, sharing stories and plans for the future. The sisters stood together, watching the scene unfold. They had helped break decades of silence, but the real power lay in the community that had risen up once given the chance. Finally, as the evening deepened into night, Danielle and Dominique stepped out of the community hall. The street was quiet now, but not with the fearful silence of before. This was a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after truth has won out over lies. Side by side, they walked into the darkness, their footsteps echoing on the sidewalk. Behind them, the corrupt system they'd exposed sat behind bars, its power broken. The fight for justice would never truly end, but in this town, at least, the silence had been shattered forever. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.